Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, May 13th, 2020. Okay, it's only Wednesday the 13th, so I guess we're safe from all the bad luck. Broadcasting today from underneath the ladder, just to make sure, I guess, that we have some bad luck. Donald Trump says he's the president. That's bad luck. We got that, as usual, going on. Let's see. Well, time for yet another show, as usual, and Bill knows it. There's no hiding it from him. Daily Coast Radio is live now. Kagro X, me, David Waldman. What are we going to do today? Well, let's see. I'll be exploring the question, is every GOP lawmaker a stupid sociopath? I was asked that question earlier today, as a matter of fact, and I guess we could even fill you in on why, but the answer will probably not shock you, but maybe it will. We'll see what happens in the next period of time. True, my answer, of course, to the question. Now, let's see. Why was the question posed exactly? I can't even recall offhand, but I think I've got it here. It's Elaine Mills had asked me the question after I saw Joshua Holland tweeting, God, these people are ridiculous. He, in turn, retweeting. Do I have the guy's name right? I see it all over the place on Twitter. It's... I've got to turn down the sound on the thing here. Acyn, A-C-Y-N. That's the Twitter handle, and it's his first name. Torabi. Acyn Torabi. I hope I've got it's something close to the way it's supposed to be pronounced, but he's highlighting a clip here. I didn't even listen to it. Maybe I should turn the sound back up. But it's Senator Kennedy. And remember, we don't have any smart senators named Kennedy, from Massachusetts the way we used to. Decent people. But we have instead one from, Louisiana, who's a Republican and kind of a notorious dipstick, honestly. But he loves to make an aw shucks spectacle of himself. And I don't know, I guess it's a clip from Fox News, and the pull quote from it is Kennedy saying, I don't want to have to wear a mask in the shower, which... is his sort of foghorn leghorn way of aw-shucksing everything and making something stupid out of it. And that's not what his accent is, and I can't do his accent. I don't care what his accent is. He's dumb-sounding, and, so we'll mix it all up. All of those stupid accents, they're very dumb, and I can't stand them. Anyway, so he doesn't want to wear a mask in the shower, and, of course, you're not supposed to do that, and nobody does do that, and nobody's asking him to do that. And it was an awfully dumb thing to do and say, and of course, no surprise there that Josh Holland is saying, people are insufferable. Every one of them wants to act like an idiot, make a ridiculous spectacle of himself to get on TV. And I guess it scores points with Trump. Who knows? That's how he gets his information, watching Fox News. The answer, though, as Elaine asked, is every GOP lawmaker a stupid sociopath? Is and that's probably true, but I did just warn her, until science knows more, and until we can conduct better testing and tracking, this is the safest assumption, and you're just going to have to stay away from them. Don't vote for them. Don't empower them, and where they are magically empowered with the authority and trappings of office, ignore them to the extent possible, and be ready at any time to detain and prosecute. That's apparently the way we're going to have to deal with these things. Okay, let's see. I'm going to have to put this piece away for later. I found sometimes some interesting non-political articles that might improve our lives catch my eye, and this is one I definitely need to look into. Although I do hate the construction of the headline, as always. When you find out everything you know is wrong, or what you need to know about, or what have you. This one is, you've been cooking chicken breasts wrong. And apparently you're supposed to, the chicken's supposed to be dead, and you're supposed to separate the breasts from the chicken. I've been just throwing the whole chicken into the pot. And it's been not only exceptionally cruel, but very difficult to cook, so they won't stay in the pot. That's just a difference between them and the frogs that we've been cooking lately. Anyway, with this simple method, we'll find out how to have moist, safe, and tasty chicken breasts every time. And while that's interesting, It's not news, but I thought I would put it aside just to show you what sort of thing. I'm telling you, I will reach for any article that distracts me from this nonsense in the morning. But we are sitting on a stockpile of chicken breasts, and we put them away because they are, in fact, good and healthy and lean protein. And it's just that nobody ever says, "Gosh, I'm starving for a chicken breast," and so we've got a surplus of them. And at this point, I'm looking for anything that can help improve our usage of our resources. Okay. So that's the news of the day. Republicans are dangerous and stay away from them until science can figure them out. And you've been cooking your chicken breast wrong. There's a 50-50 proposition here that you will find out that you have been cooking your chicken breast right, and that Outside Magazine is crazy and thinks everybody's been cooking them wrong, and that they've discovered the way to do it, and then you'll find out is how I do it. It's just chicken's no good. All right. Well, I'll check that out after the show. In the meantime, Greg Dworkin has news on probably, I don't know what, they say pork chops, something like that.
All sorts of stuff, I suppose.
Okay. All right.
If you want to save
polling
some resources, you can get one of those old-fashioned push mowers.
I have got one.
Yeah, those are useful, except if the grass gets too high.
Yes.
In which case you have to borrow a llama from one of your neighbors and maybe trim it down a little bit. Or a goat.
Llama is a good idea. I understand they're being looked to for some sort of magical cure. The next eat a llama, I think, whole. And,
actually, somebody in my neighborhood has one. Every once in a while we wind up seeing it loose on the street.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow,
it's
nice.
sort of like, you know whose it is. So
yeah, that's true. Does it spit at you? That's legendary. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they're nasty like camels.
Yeah. Well, all right.
And
it's nice to have them
around.
around.
They do a good job in cleaning the lawn. I think they raise them for the wool.
Yes, that's what I understand.
My neighbor, I think that's what he's doing.
Right. Okay. As opposed to the chops.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know how they taste, but the wool is supposed to be nice. Or is it an alpaca? I don't know whether that's like a
I don't know. It hasn't been loose in a while, and I don't have a picture of it. But,
whatever
they
hell
do have
is on my lawn.
And, just like my neighbors, in fact, do have chickens, too.
Oh.
So,
are they cooking them right?
They occasionally get loose.
Okay. Well, we can ask them about all that. They probably know about how to cook a chicken.
Yeah, I'll talk
breast.
with the chickens about how they like to be cooked and whether or not they
They
really care. Are they frogs? Are they not frogs? I don't know. So you were talking about Senator John Kennedy.
That's the guy.
But actually, he doesn't come close to being as big a jerk as Rand Paul does.
That is true.
And Rand Paul did an amazing job yesterday being a jerk. He not only started to yell at Fauci about telling him he didn't really know anything and he isn't the be-all and end-all of everything, but after that, he then did an interview and said, I don't really know if New York City, whether anything government did made any difference. They all died, what the hell? They would have died if you didn't do anything. So what are you making us do here? What's all this about?
Well,
and it's just a reminder that, Ted Cruz may not be the most disliked senator in Washington. It's quite possible that we're all Rand Paul's neighbor.
Yeah, right. Well, I've often said he's done nothing wrong, his neighbor, and now I'm raising that to maybe he deserves the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
I mean, 1 in 400 people in New York died, and of this COVID virus thing, and I think the other 399 would like to move next to Rand Paul, be his neighbor.
Well, at least for a moment. Yeah, it's making me think of Mr. Rogers now. Won't you be my neighbor?
Yeah, come over here.
Beat the crap out of me. That's not the message of Mr. Rogers.
I have something I want to lay on you.
I'm gonna change into this cardigan sweater, and then I'm gonna tackle you and break your ribs.
Right. So my position has been that yes, there are some things that would make life better, and it's always nice to hone in on those. But frankly, life is not going to get better until we throw these guys out.
All right,
just not going to happen.
I'm willing to try that, put it into clinical trials.
Fauci and Redfield from CDC and others were up at the Hill yesterday giving a Senate hearing and actually explaining that it's a pretty bleak picture until we get this under better control, and we're going to need testing. We're going to need people to do what we tell them. In order to have that happen. And, of course, there's polling on that saying that most people agree, but there's always a 14%.
Mm-hmm.
And so, media likes to hone in on that. But let's handle this one at a time. What's the political environment right now? And this includes, and it's despite whatever happens in California 25 special election yesterday, where the Republican may well beat the Democrat.
Yes.
That's Katie Hill's district that had a special election because she stepped down.
About. Yeah.
But Dave Wasserman points out, part of what happened here is that the older, reliable Republican voters showed up, and the not so reliable younger Democratic voters who moved out of Los Angeles didn't show up. At least not yet. The voting, of course, it's California, so we're not going to know for another 2 years. And the votes are still being counted.
But
mail. It looks like the Republican will pull that one out, at least until November when they have a rematch and the Democrat takes it again, because turnout will be much higher because it's a presidential year. So, a lot of this stuff happens. Don't make too much out of a special election. But the important point is about older voters. And we're going to talk about that again. As you know, there are this year's soccer moms and security dads.
Yes. How did they? I'll be curious, though. It's going to make an interesting case study. We don't want to make too much of it, but it is interesting to know that if everyone was stuck at home, how did we not get the message? And you could vote from home. How did we not get the message to people? While you're bored and looking for something to do, one thing you could do is mail a ballot.
Yeah, we shall see. So, I led the Pundit Roundup off today with a lovely picture of Rand Paul. But the story that caught my eye was a Josh Krasauer piece for National Journal, which is entitled, "It Feels Like 2008 All Over Again." Not 2016, folks. 2008.
It feels like. Yeah, okay.
The odds of a big blue wave sweeping Democrats to power are growing, with even red state Republicans growing nervous about their political position. And Josh Krasauer goes out to point out Republicans are growing increasingly worried that President Trump's shaky political position will not just cost them the presidency, also sweep in a Democratic Senate majority and further diminish their House minority.
Okay.
The latest round of polling shows the president losing to Joe Biden, as well as Democrats gaining ground in red state Senate votes that once looked like long shots. We'll talk about some of that polling, whether it's any good or not, and the pros and cons of that. From Georgia to Montana to Kansas, there's a growing chance that Democrats may capture control of the Senate with a seat or two to spare.
Okay.
That would be. Seat or two to spare would be better than despair. The current political environment is reminiscent of 2008, 2 years after Democrats swept control of the House and Senate under President George W. Bush, and then goes on to make some of those comparisons. Another major storyline this year is the Republican Party's inability to recruit credible House candidates. California 25 is one where they did, but most of the other races, not so much. Particularly in districts that Trump carried in 2016, many freshman Democrats representing Trump districts aren't facing tough Republican opposition. 12 years ago, that would be 2008, that dynamic was similarly apparent on the Senate side. Only one Democratic senator placed credible GOP competition that year, and that was Louisiana's Mary Landrieu. And she still coasted to victory over now Senator John Kennedy.
Oh, well, so much for that. All right.
Then Senator Mark Pryor, a Democrat, ran unopposed by Republicans in Arkansas, a state that John McCain comfortably carried. So in politics, nothing is ever set in stone. But right now, Trump and his Republican Party are in dire shape. The history of embattled presidents facing re-election during a worsening crisis doesn't offer much comfort. Even Trump, always averse to uncomfortable truths, recognizes this. Last week's Monmouth poll gave Democrats a 9-point advantage in the generic House ballot, a rough benchmark of the political standing of the two parties, and that's awfully similar to the 10-point advantage that Democrats held in 2008. So, that's the background.
I see.
Meanwhile, Vanity Fair has this interesting piece. Trump's feeling is, why are we losing everywhere? With advisors feuding and numbers plummeting, Trump eyes campaign shakeup. So it talks about how he might fire Brad Parscale, who he's mad at because Parscale went out and bought a Ferrari. And Jared Kushner is pushing to replace him with Nick Ayers. And doesn't want Corey Lewandowski involved. Now, Nick Ayers doesn't want much interest and doesn't have much interest in this particular campaign. He wants to work with Nikki Haley, who he sees as the future of the Republican Party, which tells you something right there. And since Trump likes Lewandowski, he's having a feud with his son-in-law, who's acting president, apparently.
Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting. Yeah, he has Jared stepped into the role that typically gets you, blown up like a landmine, getting more attention than the president.
Right. So some advisors are lobbying Trump to embrace the reopening. They're going to gamble on the economy and hope it works, even though all these scientists were up on Capitol Hill yesterday saying that that's a really bad idea without a plan. We can't stay closed forever. Nobody wants that, but you have to have a plan to reopen, and that includes testing. And so they're touting the testing that they think they're going to have by the end of June, and maybe they will, but they have to have a plan to implement it, which they don't. And, of course, they're also touting the idea that a vaccine might be ready sooner than they thought, but they also have to work really, really hard on the, shall I say it again, distribution of such things. You can't just have them. You have to have a plan for getting them out there.
Yes. Bottles, little bottles.
Let's just quote this because it's just so good from Vanity Fair. The numbers are effing terrible.
Yeah.
Another former West Wing official said there's massive anxiety and the GOP is going to take them all down with them, which is basically what should happen.
Well, yeah, sure.
Now, what's happening is that
happening.
all the people in 2016 who played pundit and were trying to analyze the 2016 election and more or less got it wrong are now so super cautious that they really don't know what to make of the environment that I just described to you, where the political professionals are saying we're screwed if we're Republicans.
Yeah.
And the pundits are saying, wait, not so fast, look what happened in 2016. Things can happen, this, that, and everything else. Let me give you some examples.
All right.
This is Nate Cohen writing in the Upshot. Are state polls any better than they were in 2016? The risk of a systematic error is lower this time, but there's still issues that seem to tilt these surveys to the left, and basically makes the case that online polls like Civics or the MSN poll that I like to tell you about just lean too far left. They just do, compared to the gold standard call-in polls that he likes.
Okay.
Because he's like totally hooked up with Siena, and so Siena is the gold standard in his mind.
Oh.
And so he's comparing everything else to Siena. In the New York Times Siena College surveys conducted in October, Mr. Biden's combined lead over Mr. Trump in the core 6 battleground states, which is Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, the states that everybody agrees is going to decide the election, was 2 points. The lead would have been 6 points had it not been weighted by education or turnout, which correlates with education.
Oh, okay.
So more pollsters are weighting by education than 4 years ago. It could still be better, but overall, a lot of these are doing education weighting, which is important.
Yeah.
Right. But the online-only state polls still, compared to Siena, have Biden a couple of points in his favor. Now, whether it matters or not is unclear. He's just pointing out that when you move online is still untested. And the only big pollster who has state polling everywhere online is Morning Consult.
Okay.
And so, are they right or are they not right? We don't know.
We don't.
A really interesting meta look at all of this actually comes from 538. They have a nice chat here. If Trump is down in the polls, why do so many Americans think he'll win?
I don't know.
Basically, it's 2016 post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Okay.
They don't want to recognize that Trump is really in trouble, and besides 2016 and butter emails. Plus, they think he'll cheat.
Yes, I think
so. Between those things, they don't want to be like totally confident. Even though the pros who are looking at this are saying we're screwed, the pundits are saying, yeah, but Trump pulled it out in 2016, so let's overcompensate and assume he can always pull it out.
We are always clamoring for the punditry to learn from experience.
But you don't want to overlearn, though. And that's what's happened. People have overlearned this, and now they think that, like, nothing, he's Teflon Don and nothing can touch him. And none of that's true. He remains the most unpopular president in history who won on a fluke in 2016.
Yeah.
And while it's true that there's an electoral college advantage for him in that a lot of the white non-college voters live in the Midwest, in the states that'll decide the election, he's nonetheless running behind in a lot of those, like Michigan, for example.
Okay.
Even his own, party Senate nominee recognizes this and is starting to break from Trump in terms of conversations. So it's a lot of overcompensation on the part of the pundits, but it's going to be interesting to follow because then they'll have to explain their position later.
Yeah.
Well, this is why we were the way we are. You have to understand that this and that. Yeah, I understand it. I'm also looking at what's going on here. And it isn't just the polls. It's the entire, situation. It's the entire feeling of what's going on here in terms of watching this pandemic with historic evidence of lack of leadership, both on the economic and the viral front. And what happens is, as he starts to push for the wrong solutions, I personally am convinced it's going to wind up backfiring because those solutions really are wrong, and it's going to be clearer and clearer that that's the case. So that's what the pundits are missing, and they would love to say, well, we do everything rationally, we do by the numbers, and let's take the pandemic out of this and just look at where we are. You can't.
Yeah,
let's just forget about the fact that we're about to. We're already in a recession. We're about to be in a depression. Let's just take that out of the equation and look at it the way we always did right up until 2 months ago. You can't.
But, and that wasn't really even the way they did it. It used to be that the economy was the center of everything and the best predictor of how everything would go.
And now they're finding excuses for why it doesn't really matter. It's a really head scratcher when you start to look at this stuff. Here's the Washington Post with polling this morning. Americans' expectations for safe public gatherings slip July at the earliest.
Okay.
2 in 3 adults now saying it'll not be until July or later before these events can happen.
Okay. I mean,
right. The findings provide more evidence that Americans remain worried about the threat of the virus and cautious about efforts to lift stay-at-home restrictions. Remember, this is what Republicans are pushing.
Yes. Hurry up.
Now, large majorities say keeping distance, wearing a mask, staying at home, and avoiding gatherings are necessary. Stay 6 feet apart from people in public. 86% say that. Wear a mask. 80. Stay at home as much as possible. 78. Rand Paul is on the wrong side of this.
Yeah.
Avoid gatherings with friends you do not live with. 75.
Okay.
So the public understands it's a risk. They hear what Fauci is saying. And there was, I think, a Politico story about Republicans are getting Fauci fatigue.
Yes, I did see that.
Trump versus skeptics. Reopening fight highlights polar opposite outcomes. Reopening quickly could boost Trump and the economy, or spark catastrophe, says the Politico. And the thing is, when you have a situation where it could spark catastrophe, the idea of not taking precautions is just bizarre.
Yeah.
Look, I know that I might make money on this. It could also kill your kids. But, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we roll the dice, and if it kills your kids, I'm going into a tunnel. I can't hear you.
So let's look at Navigator survey polling out this morning. They're day 37 of the Navigator survey tracking poll. Over the course of tracking, Trump's coronavirus approval rating with older voters 55 and older has steadily dipped, going from plus 17 to minus 6.
That is steady.
Consistent with numerous polls showing Trump standing with the 2020 soccer moms, that is to say older Americans, continues to slide. Over the last few weeks, the negative conversation around Trump has shifted from injecting bleach to concerns over reopening too soon and him not doing enough. So on April 29th, the major word cloud piece that you picked up was inject and disinfectant.
Right, yes.
On May 5th is not enough, plus inject. And now it's reopen, not enough economy, and inject.
Okay.
That inject stuff stuck because it was just so stupid. And it's something people could understand. The word that best describes voters' concerns with Trump's response to the pandemic is unprepared. Okay. Irresponsible is also up there. Self-absorbed, erratic, and chaotic, but unprepared comes first. Trump's approval ratings across the board remain underwater, with disapproval lining to 53% on his overall approval. Again, 44 to 53. That 44 is really soft because when you look at, how is he doing on coronavirus, it's lower than that in most circumstances, or dropping.
Yes.
Whereas his approval rating stays the same. In fact, there was a CNN poll out the other day which showed that only 36% of people believe him when it comes to coronavirus.
Oh.
But his approval rating was 45.
Okay.
Right? 9% of his supporters don't believe a word he says.
Wow. What
but they're
do
going
they
to
believe?
support him anyway. They say in this poll, which is not the same thing as voting for him, because in that same poll, Biden has the lead. So looking at his job approval and thinking, well, that tells you everything. Actually, it really doesn't. It's stable. It's one of the more stable things, his job approval. But that doesn't mean people are voting for him. It certainly doesn't mean they believe him. It doesn't mean that they think he's doing a good job on coronavirus. That's why the zeitgeist about him winning is just so bizarre.
Well,
Now, first time in our daily tracking poll, says Nick Gorovich, one of the pollsters, Margie O'Mara, and other pollsters are part of this group here. More people say the economy is in a recession, 43%, than it's headed toward one, 40. So we're there.
Oh, okay. I mean,
Okay, we don't have to wait to be in a recession. We are in a recession. And while there's clearly been a disproportionate impact of coronavirus in urban areas, it's also worth noting that impact has been widespread across the country, even in small towns and rural areas. 23%, I'm one of those, know someone who's been infected, and 59% know somebody who's lost a job.
I see. Okay.
So the impact is pretty widespread. And there's been some coverage in the media, boycotts of stores like Costco. They require you to wear a mask.
Yes.
What that coverage is missing is that the mask requirements are good for business. People are far more likely than less likely to shop somewhere that has a mask requirement.
Yeah. I mean, the first I heard of it maybe a week or so ago, I was like, great, get the hell out of my way. I can't wait to get there.
Right? The rationale behind the so-called movement, that's scare quotes around movement, to boycott stores requiring masks is completely rejected by the American people. 84% say stores requiring masks are responsible, and 16% say those stores are violating American values and freedoms. Of course, the media is focusing on the 16%, but that's not a close call, says Nick. That's like a huge difference.
Yeah, it is, and I don't know. We need a campaign to pressure the news media, particularly the TV news media, to stop covering these nuts. See if we can make it work. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with Greg Dworkin here on for our second half-hour segment. Where would we leave off? We're in the middle of more polls, yes?
Yeah, we're talking about it's beneficial for stores to be cautious. Now, this article is called Trump versus the Skeptics. It's from Politico. Reopening fight highlights polar opposite outcomes. And basically, it's talking about how the conservative economists and other advisors in the White House think that pushing the economy to open is really the best thing to do because then we bounce back fast. And the fact that it's courting disaster is not their concern. They think that when nothing happens, you open and nothing happens in regard to the virus, then all of those people who are advocating caution will simply look foolish. That was Rand Paul's advocated position yesterday during the hearings and after. The problem, of course, is that not only are they probably wrong, but being wrong is an unmitigated disaster.
Yes, that is.
And that's not to say that we are committed to predicting disaster. It's that it's just really foolish to ignore the warnings.
Yeah.
Be careful about walking up here on this catwalk. There are no rails. What could go wrong?
Right. And once you find out that
professionals can go up there and walk, but that doesn't mean that you should just do that and don't pay attention.
It's a very Republican attribute, and I find that there's almost always, whenever there's a decision point to be made, and Republicans want to push for something, and Democrats or anyone else are being cautious about it. Republicans love to just say, burn the lifeboats, burn the bridges. You'll all be proved wrong and proved foolish, and they never leave any escape route, which is just bad planning always. And that that seems to be their favorite play, and now they're doing it, but with your life. It used to be with just maybe, say, the education system or our tax base, but now your very life is at stake. Okay.
Senator Mitt Romney, a frequent Trump critic from the right, on Tuesday added a bipartisan note of criticism to the president's declaration of victory on testing. I find our testing record nothing to celebrate whatsoever, he said. Those who fear that states are reopening too quickly warn the virus cases will spike in multiple areas, possibly overwhelming hospitals once again, triggering a sell-off in markets and forcing new lockdown orders that could tip the economy from a short but deep recession into a depression. Even if some things go well, some in corporate America say the boom times Trump is predicting are not likely to materialize. Our expectation here is this is going to be fits and starts. I'm not somebody who's bought into a super aggressive everything gets fine in the fall sort of thing. I think that's crazy talk, said Andrew Silvernail, chairman and CEO of Illinois-based manufacturing firm IDEX. If we get lucky and for some reason this goes away with weather or something else, or a vaccine is found more quickly, we think, or you have very, very effective treatment, that's great news, but I don't think anybody should bank on that, and I certainly wouldn't manage the company expecting that. Okay. And others note the fact that the virus is spreading among White House staff will not inspire Americans that it's time to rush back to work. And the point there is really, not only does it highlight their incompetence, but it takes a while once it's seeded to really see the results. So you always have to wait 2 weeks after. Opening on May 1st and declaring victory on May 10th is incredibly stupid. But at the same time, it's the American people who will decide whether this is working or not working. If you open and they don't come, it didn't work.
Yeah, I guess not. Of course, it'll be interesting too. Is they'll open, and then if the people don't show up, it's bad for the economy. But then you'll have Rand Paul type saying, and there's no huge spike in illness either. Well, that's because people are still self-isolating. But we were open during it, and therefore something. So
don't forget Rand Paul said outside of New England there really hasn't been a problem.
Yes, right. I'm not certain.
Which is really right along the lines of. But aside from that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? It's an amazing thing to say.
Yes,
and that's why New Yorkers who already for some reason didn't hate him now. So this is from The Atlantic. Donald Trump has no plan. Thousands are dying each week. The economy is cratering, and the president is at a total loss. I think that's a better summary of what's going on than all of the happy talk. Peter Nicholas in The Atlantic has a piece, How Trump Plans to Weaponize COVID-19 Against Biden. There's a conspicuous irony to his argument, however. Trump is betting he can stoke enough doubts about Biden's leadership that his own record looks preferable. Trump wins if voters view the race as a clear choice between Biden and him, but if the election becomes a referendum on Trump, it's a much closer call, one senior Trump administration official told me. If it's a referendum on Trump, it's not a close call.
I guess. This guy doesn't talk to the other one who was in the other article who said it was an effing disaster or whatever.
Exactly right. Deflecting attention to Biden mirrors a tactic Trump has long deployed when he's under pressure. He seizes accusations against him, flings them back. Democrats who led the impeachment fight committed treason. Russia wanted Hillary Clinton to be president.
Yeah. They're free with the word. I mean, we should be too, but.
Right. The challenge is he needs voters to be thinking about an opponent who's largely confined himself to his Delaware home. Although polling shows voters overall are dissatisfied with how Trump is managed, at least one recent survey showed Trump holding a small lead over his Democratic opponent, and just about every other poll does not show that. Now, there was a report that he was down as much as 9 in his own campaign polling, but then it came back. It snapped back.
They fixed it.
They fixed it. Yes, as if a 9-point lead in this environment where when you look at polling, it's like train tracks, all of a sudden bounced back.
Well, they have the poll right. We've all been wrong up until now.
Yep. So he's got issues in terms of what he's trying to do. It's not too early. It is too early to say whether Trump will successfully redirect the blame he's now absorbing. Despite the damage wrought by the pandemic, Trump allies believe the race remains competitive. Maybe. On the other hand, you have to remember they're really stupid people. You always have to figure that in when you listen to their analysis. It's like, I'm tired of listening to people like Fauci because it's not going to help our reelection, so we have to do this other thing. And then you're supposed to say, okay, well, these are such smart people. Let's listen to their election analysis and take it seriously. Okay. Internal polling shows if the election were held today, Trump would be on the cusp of picking up the The 270 electoral votes needed to win one person close to the campaign told me. In other words, he's losing.
But he's on the cusp.
But he's on the cusp.
Yes.
Inside GOP circles,
coming
some
in
are finding
second.
Trump's routine exhausting. When I spoke with the Senate aide about Trump's methods, he described the attacks on Biden as revisionist history. I don't think anybody was paying attention to Biden's role in the H1N1 stuff, nor did people really associate Biden with the economic recovery. He was vice president. I asked whether Republican lawmakers are worried that the pandemic make Trump's campaign unwinnable. Well, I don't think people are freaking out that it's the end of Trump. They're freaking out about whether it's the end of their career.
Yeah,
which is
okay.
right.
All right, yeah.
I don't care if Trump wins or loses. The question is whether I win or lose.
Right.
Well, thank you for your loyalty, Senator. It's really appreciated up here in the White House.
Well,
if Trump goes down and goes
did more
down
of
big,
that.
that means you lose a lot of congressional seats and Senate races. But if you had Biden elected in a Republican Senate, I'm not sure you have a lot of complaints.
All right.
Right? That's why all the stories about Republicans freaking out because they see the majority disappearing are the important part of this story. They don't give a crap about whether Trump's elected or not elected. They never have.
Well,
that's not their
that's good.
concern. Oh, by the way, the well-being of the country isn't either. It's whether or not they get elected or reelected.
Yes. Well, yeah, and I could stand for them to, be reminded of that from time to time. It's just at some points in, given the circumstances, it means different things. At the end of the impeachment trial, they thought that standing by the president, despite all the evidence, increased their odds of reelection. And then there was a pandemic, and now, shoot, we might have done the wrong thing, and they may not hold it against us on our impeachment vote, but the pandemic and depression might sink us.
It might. So again, you go back to Rachel Bidecoffer's negative partisanship model.
Okay.
And the idea somehow that everything that gins up Republican base support is good and is one-sided and can't possibly gin up Democratic base support is just a bizarre way of looking at the world. Well, of course Trump is going to attack Biden and be ridiculous and do all these dumb things and open up the economy and make the case that only he can restart things that he ruined because I'm the one that drove the car in the ditch and only I can drive it out. Is like, Democrats are supposed to believe that and become dispirited and not vote because they think, oh, well, obviously, you only live once, nothing matters.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what they think we're supposed to do.
But that's not how it's going to happen.
Oh, well.
People are kind of upset about what's going on now. And guess what? They're going to turn out and they're going to vote.
Okay. I mean, I hope so. We are all clear. We don't have to do any extra publicity to let people know that, like, this year is a presidential election, right? Mm-hmm. But we have to tell people when there's special elections. And this one is going to be special. I will say that. But, all right. Well,
it was special yesterday. Sure. I think it's going to be even more special in November.
Specialer. Okay.
Anyway, so that's the Zeitgeist. That's the state of where we are at. For the most part, the polls go up and down a tick here and there. There's really not much evidence that Biden is losing steam. There's not much evidence that things are changing. But I think what's really important is the overall underlying issues, and that's the pandemic and the state of the economy and what people feel about that. The old saying is, look, economic impressions are baked in 6 months before the election. Well, that's now.
Okay. That is now. Look at that.
So economy isn't so good. And the idea that all of a sudden this will turn around and people won't blame Trump because why? Because 2016 and this, that, and everything else, right. Because Hillary Clinton will somehow surface again and he'll be able to use her as a foil. You really have to do contortions and jump through hoops. And yes, it is possible for Trump to win. But let's not kid ourselves. He's behind now. And unless things change, he's going to be more behind because things are going to get worse before they get better. It's just that simple.
Okay. Well, we should throw out all the various models from the old. Although,
well, just stop overreacting to 2016. Stop underreacting to what you're seeing right now. Stop making excuses for why it's not true. People will do that because they don't want to get burned about being wrong the way they were in 2016. So they're going to hedge everything now.
Yeah.
That doesn't make for good analysis.
Stop looking for
if you're
other
afraid to do
years
analysis,
to pretend
just stop doing it.
That is an option available to you. You could look for another line of work. Now's a good time to pick up a new hobby. I've been told that the pandemic
try
was
baking.
perfect.
A lot of people bake.
Right, that's right. Yeah, instead of trying to predict
See what you can do with yeast.
Try the whole sourdough thing that everybody's into.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well,
or crochet or make masks. You know, learn a different profession.
Yes. There's plenty of things you can do. I read the other day another brilliant story from the New York Times of people who either engineered it or accidentally got stranded in various resorts for the pandemic.
The people who are fleeing New York and now they're stuck.
Right, and are
we supposed to feel sorry for them? That is the New York Times audience, of course.
That's right, including the one couple who chose to risk getting stranded. I think they knew that it was in the cards that they possibly could, but they chose to get stranded in a place that was within their budget, which turned out to be Nicaragua, which, maybe that's good planning. Might be a nice place to get familiar with, but I was the most New York Times-ish thing ever, revealing what everybody did for a living, and, in order to explain why they were stuck in various places. This couple were artisanal marijuana pipe makers, both of them. I thought that was pretty incredible, and I didn't know you could make enough money to vacation in Nicaragua for 6 months on that, although it is possible that maybe
generally those pipes have two parts to it, right? They have the bowl and they have the stem, so maybe each did one, and then they work together to put it together.
Maybe old King Cole worked with them and would combine. He would call for both the pipe and the bowl and put them together, and that's how it began. I don't know. That was the most amazing thing I ever heard, and just another one of those, well, what am I even working for? I can't believe that this is the case, that the two people can make a living that way. I got 3 would be outrageous, of course, but 2, well, it boggled the mind. But I don't know. I'd leave it to the New York Times to find them. Is there any way you could make anybody feel worse about this? Sure. Here you go. The artisanal marijuana pipe makers are living it up in Nicaragua, which might not be.
I'll just end this with Morning Money Ben White's observation, which is a simple one, which he should probably pin as a tweet. He just said, "Look, when in doubt, blame Obama."
Okay, I mean they're doing that. That's the latest hot stuff.
Yeah, somehow or other they have to come up with Obamagate and some reason for that. Again, as I said before, as if somehow or other that would not tempt Democrats to actually vote because they're ticked off about that.
Maybe, I guess.
Why don't you have a show trial? Why don't you put Obama on trial and expect that's going to rev up the Republican base and do nothing on the Democratic side?
But it's the other part that is the problem. I'm being warned about that left and right, and it seems like the sort of thing that they might think would be beneficial to them.
Yeah, again, you have to remember, they're really stupid people. Yeah. Obama's really popular, Trump is not, and they think this is going to work.
I guess so. Meanwhile, although there would be a little bit of fitting irony in it, given how much effort initially was put into convincing Obama that he really needed to consider prosecuting people from the George W. Bush administration. For him to say, no, we look forward, not backward, and then find himself on trial would be really something. But I don't really need to gamble with getting that far. Still, lots of weird things and weird little ironies are out there.
Right. I just noticed this story. Yeah, I told you about the one from The Atlantic, which basically said Trump has no plan. That was their headline.
Oh, yeah. Well, he doesn't.
Well, this one is from Vox. It's entitled, "We Don't Have a President or a Plan."
I guess that's why we don't have a plan. No president. Okay.
The White House doesn't have a plan. It doesn't have a framework. It doesn't have a philosophy, and it doesn't have a goal. Okay. Yeah, they do. They want to reelect Trump. That's the only thing they care about. People just need to they don't want to recognize the fact that Trump does not have their interest at all in mind. It's not that he doesn't prioritize their interests. He doesn't have them in mind at all. It is such a difficult thing for ordinary Americans to accept, that the White House really doesn't care whether you live or die. They have no interest in it whatsoever. It's not that they want you to die. That's really an unfair way of putting it. They just don't care. You are not on their radar. They have no interest in you whatsoever. They simply want to be reelected. And that's true for just about all of the Republican Senate, and I can't make that point strongly enough. You saw it in the hearings. You have the Democrats wearing masks, the Republicans not, because it shows weakness, and they don't really care about anything Fauci has to say. They just want to be reelected, and they would really like the whole thing to go away, except it's not.
Yeah. I will say it was a really remarkable show of shamelessness, and I suppose, we're used to it by now, but of all people to have Rand Paul come out of there having taken the lead role and taking on Fauci, I guess like one of the most trusted voices on the pandemic, from the guy who's been maybe the most irresponsible about his approach to the pandemic, that Republicans would say, yes, let's do this, let's spotlight this. I mean, I don't know what the outcome is, but I suppose it tells you nearly all you need to know about the way they're going to approach things from now on. Okay.
All right. Anyway, so that's the summary for today. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll do some more because there's always more to do.
Yes.
But again, the major message for today, don't be fooled by the polls or the pundits. Things are not going in Trump's direction. You'll find people afraid to say that because they don't want to be wrong. But they'd be wrong not to say it because that's the situation right now.
I mean, the numbers are what they are. You can always put a caveat in there, but I don't know why your conclusion would be,
right.
I'm tired of being wrong.
The electorate don't really care what your analysis is.
I guess so. That's true too.
That's basically the bottom line. So with that, the way to get things moving again and get us in the right direction and work for a new deal is to get rid of these people.
Okay.
And we're on our way to doing that. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, let's do that. Very good. Thanks, Greg. Plenty to round up here, including, I guess, let's see. We'll do a brief race through the things I put away in the last few minutes of Pocket, including the story that Paul Manafort is to be released from prison on account of all things, of the coronavirus. Of course, coronavirus sweeping through our prison population, and the safe, sane, and humane thing to do is to release as many prisoners as might make sense to do, let's say starting with non-violent felons, so that they can instead serve out some portion of their term in home confinement. It's not necessarily my preferred outcome for Paul Manafort himself, but clearly we need to be doing something about reducing the danger of the continued spread of the disease in the prison population. How it comes to be that Paul Manafort jumps to the front of the line for release, I don't know. A lot of people pointing out the difference between him and Michael Cohen not being released from prison. And I guess the big difference here is perhaps age and susceptibility to pre-existing conditions for Paul Manafort. Although there's a part of us that feels not entirely at ease with exercising our principles on behalf of people who have dedicated their lives to attacking those principles. But I guess that's what makes principles difficult. But all right, there we are. I guess I'm not. It's not like I'm clamoring for Michael Cohen to get out of jail either. I don't regard him as any kind of hero because he spilled some of the beans on Donald Trump, whereas Paul Manafort didn't. I suppose that's a little bit better, but it doesn't really make me sad for Michael Cohen in any way. But okay, this is the news. ABC News reporting this. I also saw it re-reported, I guess, and commented on over at Raw Story. But I happen to have the ABC News story to which they linked closer at hand now, having clicked through to see where their source was coming from. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort released from to home confinement amid coronavirus concerns. Manafort's lawyers had requested a release, citing his age and pre-existing conditions. Catherine Falders and Luke Barr reporting this one for ABC News. Of course, there's also a part of us that'll be, annoyed by the fact that if Manafort hadn't been convicted, for instance, or had never, let's say it this way, had he never committed the crimes at all in the first place, and were therefore free during the past couple of months, he would have been spending all of his time insisting that coronavirus was a hoax and a joke. And here's something. You know what we ought to do? Here's a good follow-up for the media. He'll be released, and I'm sure there'll be photos, and he'll go home, and he'll be on home confinement. And I'm sure every once in a while he'll risk, violating his home confinement terms. Although, that's another thing I guess we should point out. Like, being on home confinement, is that really such a punishment now? I'm on home confinement, and so are you. So, I don't know how terrible that is. But okay. Assuming we're doing a humanitarian thing here, which assumes that he's human and deserves it, which is a point of debate. The question is, he'll be photographed on his way home, and he'll be photographed from time to time, I'm sure, stepping outside the home and stretching the bounds of home confinement. Can he go on his front lawn where he's seen by the paparazzi? My question is, will he be wearing a mask? That is the big question. Because if his lawyers get him released from prison over coronavirus fears, only for us to find out that he's a coronavirus denier the whole time, that will be quite annoying. And I think I'm willing to put $10 on that. He will annoy us with that. Okay. Let's see what the article says, just to see what sort of terms are involved here. Trump's former campaign chairman, Manafort, has been released from prison to serve the remainder of his sentence in home confinement because of concerns over the novel coronavirus, two sources familiar with the matter told ABC News. Now, remember, he's supposed to be in prison for another, 4 years or so, maybe even more than that. I don't know. The term is mentioned somewhere. So, I mean, if coronavirus disappears as a continuing concern, we can't send him back to prison. I don't know why. If it should be a temporary thing. Manafort was released from FCI, is that Federal Correctional Institution, Loretto in central Pennsylvania early Wednesday morning, the two sources said. So that was this morning, so we may have missed our chance to get that picture. I'm curious, though. An attorney for Manafort confirmed he had been released to home confinement but declined to comment further. The Bureau of Prisons did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Manafort is 71 and has been serving out his more than 7-year sentence for charges related to Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation in a federal correctional institution in central Pennsylvania. He was found guilty of tax fraud and conspiracy, sentenced by a federal judge in March 2019, slated to be released from prison ordinarily November 4th, 2024. I wonder if that's election day. I don't know what November 4th, 2024 is. That would be interesting. The charges stem from his work related to Ukraine, of all places, between 2006 and 2015. Manafort joined the Trump campaign in March 2016. We know this background. The decision to move Manafort to home confinement comes after his attorneys wrote a letter to the Bureau of Prisons last month requesting he be immediately transferred to home confinement because he is at high risk of contracting COVID-19 because of his age and pre-existing conditions. While there are no known cases of coronavirus at FCI Loretto, sources have told ABC News that the prison was an old monastery and due to the open configuration of the prison would be devastated by the virus if it ever showed up. But it isn't going to because it's a hoax, but let me out anyway. Okay. In December, Manafort was hospitalized for several days due to what sources described as a cardiac event. He recovered at a local Pennsylvania hospital under the supervision of correctional officers. His lawyers say his pre-existing conditions include high blood pressure, liver disease, and respiratory ailments, and add that Manafort contracted influenza and bronchitis in February of 2020. So the flu got him. It's just like the flu. And you know what? We didn't release him for the flu. Why should we release? All right, you get the idea, right? Manafort, although here referred to as, in this particular instance, Manafort, which is fine, takes 11 medications daily, according to his attorneys. Here's the wording of the letter. Is this going to be of any interest? I'll skim for you. Here's a mention of Bill Barr, right? We request that he be transferred to home confinement to serve the remainder of his sentence or alternatively for the duration of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We see we should be doing that. They gave him the option to do that. In accordance with Attorney General William Barr's directives to the BOP, Bureau of Prisons, on March 26th and April 3rd, and the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act. Hooray. That, let's see, his attorneys here are Kevin Downing and Todd Blanche in an April 13th letter. We got it. Let's see, anything else really worth pulling out here? Let's see. Last month, the Justice Department issued a clarification of its policy on releasing inmates to home confinement after a series of conflicting messages sparked confusion and uncertainty among prisoners, attorneys, and federal courts. Sure. Let's see what the what the situation is. Bureau of Prisons is, at this time, prioritizing for consideration those inmates who have either, 1, served 50% or more of their sentences, not so here, or 2, have 18 months or less remaining in their sentences and have served 25% or more of their sentences. That ain't true either. Well, that was what federal prosecutors wrote in a court filing in the Southern District of New York last month, as BOP processes the inmates eligible for home confinement under those criteria and learns more about the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on BOP facilities. It is assessing whether and how to otherwise priority consideration. I think they mean prioritize consideration. Okay, fine. Manafort has served just under 30% of his prison sentence. However, prison officials have wide latitude when considering these releases on a case-by-case basis. So, what do you know? Some latitude for Paul Manafort. So, I guess whatever. Congratulations to him and family. Earn this, Mr. Manafort. And, of course, he's never earned anything in his life. He's stolen everything he's ever gotten. And so I imagine we'll be disappointed in the results, and he will steal this one too. All right, well, that's a little bit depressing, but I guess you can feel good about your humanitarian principles, and why shouldn't you? We'll see if we can find something else to make you miserable after this brief 1-minute break. I still don't know how to cook chicken. Let's see if I can check that out. Plus some other quick news hits, and then maybe some deeper dive. I don't know. It's hard to say. We'll see what direction fate brings us after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show, right here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, here's a question, or a interesting comparison for you. I happened to see one story fly by, and another was sent to me by our friend BJ Hutch, the Montreal girl who noted for the record. Let's see, I'll keep hers for the comparison. Here's the other story, which I actually saw later, but I'm going to read to you, or at least mention first. Let's see, I think I saw a TPM retweeting this, and they are running this AP article. Germany to start loosening border controls. That, of course, likely because of the much more serious reaction among Europeans to the lockdown and to the virus in general, and their lockdown versions much stricter, flattened the curve a lot better, and have gotten the virus under control. All you have to do is peek, as we normally do, at the Worldometers charts to find out how much better they're doing, although they're still up at the top of the list in terms of numbers of cases and numbers of deaths. They have kept their raw numbers down and their numbers per 1 million in population down. Let's see where we are early this morning. Germany not far from the top of the list with 173,546 cases and 7,780 deaths reported. So, it has been rough going for them, but not nearly like it's been for us. They have about 1/2 or less the rate of total cases per million in population, and considerably less than half, probably, not quite 1/3, but less than a half the rate of deaths per 1 million in population. So they will be loosening some of their border controls because they and their neighbors seem to have gotten things under better control, and so they'll phase in some freer movement. Germany plans to start loosening its border controls this weekend after 2 months of restriction, according to the AP. Interior Minister, I've got to be talking about German names now, Horst Seehofer, do I have that right? Said Wednesday that checks on the border with Luxembourg will be dropped after Friday. That doesn't ever sound like a risky thing to do, dropping your border controls with Luxembourg. How's Luxembourg doing? I haven't seen them up at the top of the list, so maybe that's a good place to start. I might have to switch over to alphabetical. There we are. There's Luxembourg. Nestled comfortably in the number of cases between Oman and Armenia. That's got to be a pretty good performance. Though they have, of course, a small population, so they've been suffering 163 deaths per 1 million in population, but from only 3,894 cases. Anyway, so loosening restrictions between Germany and Luxembourg dropped entirely, I guess, on Friday. On the borders with France, Switzerland, and Austria, where they're higher on the list, all border crossings will be opened rather than selected ones at present, and authorities will switch to spot rather than systematic checks. So I guess it could be checked at random on your way into Germany. Seehofer said that the aim is to restore free travel across those three borders on June 15th, so long as the coronavirus infections allow it. Germany imposed checks on the borders with France, Switzerland, Austria, Luxembourg, and Denmark. They've got lots of borders on March 16th, and people without a valid reason to travel haven't been allowed to cross. Eastern neighbors, Poland and the Czech Republic, closed their own borders, so they took care of it themselves. Seehofer said Germany is prepared to relax controls on the Danish border, but Denmark is in the process of consulting with its other neighbors, so they want to get things right. And I guess they've got borders with, well, Denmark. I mean, they've got a water border, but it's easily crossed, and there's even bridges like across to the rest of Scandinavia. Isn't that right? I'm see if I can, if I remember correctly from like diplomacy and risk, right? They've got land crossings to Sweden, bridge crossings. I mean, they are island hopping across. But Copenhagen is right across the bridge from Sweden, from Malmo, Sweden, which, and remember when conservatives hated Sweden and all their stupid policies because Malmo was a no-go zone because of all the Muslims that were there, but now they love Sweden because they have we're open for coronavirus policy. So I guess Denmark is going to take that slowly. With respect to opening their other borders. I mean, the one border they have on land is with Germany. The other drivable land crossing is with Sweden, and that's going to take them a longer time probably to agree to open. I guess they probably have they might have some ferry connections with direct to Norway, but probably that troubles them a lot less. Hell, they may even have some ferry connections to Poland, for all I know. Anyway, that was meant to be contrasted with what B.J. Hutch sent us, and also was socked away in Pocket, if I can find it right. Okay, so Germany loosening its controls. Guess where they're not loosening border controls? Right here. Now, is it because we love closing our borders to prevent those evil southern folks from coming to claim a share in American prosperity, which no longer exists? No, it's the U.S.-Canada border. U.S.-Canada border will not be opening anytime soon, or at least not without controls. And who's pushing it? The Canadians. What do you know? They actually might know something about what they're doing. Okay. I can't actually read the article. I have to create a free account, which I could do, but I probably won't in the middle of the show, to read the Globe and Mail's account of this thing. But I wonder if Pocket can extract some of that. Yeah, look at that. No border controls on this article, Globe and Mail. You should probably work on that one. Canada-U.S. border expected to stay closed to non-essential travel. It's not closed, but to non-essential travel until June 21st, we are told. Possibly by Robert Fife at the Globe and Mail, but sometimes Pocket gets that information wrong. The Canada-U.S. border is expected to stay closed to non-essential travel until June 21st to safeguard citizens of both countries. That's very nice of you to say. From the spread of COVID-19, according to sources with knowledge of the bilateral talks. Let's do a bilateral. No, non-essential travel across the border was first restricted to all on March 21st for a 30-day period in an effort to stem the transmission of novel coronavirus. That didn't work. Canada got it. The restriction was extended until May 21st, and sources say U.S. and Canadian officials are in talks that will see the border closure extended for another month. The sources said Canada asked for a 30-day rollover, and it is almost certain that Washington will agree to the proposal. What? How dare you? The Globe and Mail granted anonymity to the sources, who were not allowed to publicly discuss U.S.-Canada border talks because they're so sensitive. One senior source said the hard debate will come next month when there will likely be different views on when to begin to lift the restrictions. That's interesting. So they didn't even meet any pushback from Americans. They're all going to be fired now because Trump should have ordered them to demand an immediate opening of the border for Americans to cross, but not for yucky, disgusting Canadians. I'm surprised that he didn't take the opportunity to do that. And let's see. Anything else? I mean, I think the story goes pretty much as you would expect from there on. Trump probably being jerky and Trudeau less so. Let's guess. Anything else happening here? I don't know if we can pull any more out of this. Let's see. Some differences between the provinces. Some provinces, including Ontario and British Columbia, have been strongly opposed to reopening the U.S. border until health authorities gave the go-ahead. It's our view that the border should not open for visitors at this time. British Columbia Health Minister Adrian Dix said Monday, with respect to the United States right now, it would make no sense to have visitors traveling either from Canada to the United States and returning, or to have visitors, not essential traffic, but visitors coming from the United States to Canada. The partial closure of the border does not affect essential travel, including truck and rail traffic carrying food and goods essential to supply chains, as well as travel to get to work. Flights between both countries continue, so you can sneak in that way, I guess. My guess is, it sounds like the more sensitive provinces are those across the border from some of our more serious outbreaks. Detroit and our Pacific Northwest outbreak, and I guess where things have been somewhat less virulent and we've suffered far fewer cases and deaths, the provinces opposite those border crossings are, if not open to it, less concerned or are less apt to express strong concerns. So, it's almost like the Canadians are being sensible, which that can't really be true, right? All right, let's see. A few other interesting stories to touch on. I don't know if we'll dive into this one, but I guess a purely political story, but worthy of note. It will be probably the subject of some commentary over the next couple of days. It does carry over an old theme for the show about how elections actually work, primary and general. The Hill reporting Biden and Sanders allies create unity task forces, which I'm sure is encouraging to Armando, who loves unity task forces between Sanders and anybody in the Democratic Party. But okay, unity task forces to explore policy initiatives. In other words, Biden appears to have won the primary and is in all likelihood the nominee. I mean, I guess you can't nail it down just yet because we have to go through the formalities. And Sanders lost. But, the thinking, he was a major rival. He's the last one standing anyway. And he's got the supporters who say that they're going to be either reluctant or slow to move to expressing outright support for Biden, and certainly wouldn't do so unless there were major concessions made on policy. So what does Biden's camp do? Well, let's consider whether we ought to make any concessions on policy, maybe, or at least put up the appearance of being open to changing on policy, and see how many people express positive views about making the switch then. And if not enough, well, then maybe we'll even adopt some of those views and see what happens then. So they're taking a cautious, phased reopening approach, much as we should be doing in the States and nationally and internationally with coronavirus. So I'm not saying that, Bernie Sanders is the coronavirus. I'm just saying you take things slow. And be cautious. Allies to presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and former primary rival Senator Bernie Sanders will form unity task forces to explore policy initiatives for the Democratic platform, the Biden campaign announced on Wednesday. As much as it would annoy Armando, I'm sure, he would also say, yeah, whatever it takes. And then he'd probably cough at this point, like as I would. But then clear his throat and say, who cares? Nobody cares about the platform. And to the extent that Sanders people do, fine, placate them and make it a part of the platform. And I'm sure that's probably how we would approach it, although he would say, but, don't ask me to go to any of the meetings. I wouldn't be able to control myself. So Biden and Sanders campaigns are teaming up to create task forces to explore 6 policy issues. Since we were pretending to be Armando, let's also, we would clear our throat and then, slam on the brakes and almost have an accident, but then continue as though nothing had happened. Biden and Sanders' campaigns are teaming up to create task forces to explore 6 policy issues and develop recommendations ahead of the Democratic National Convention, which somehow, I guess, is going to happen. I don't know. The task forces, each consisting of 8 members, will examine climate change. Let's see if you could guess what they were. Climate change, criminal justice reform. So far, so good. Economy, education, healthcare, and immigration. Those are pretty good spots. I guess that's probably what we would have guessed. But I didn't give us a chance to guess. The Biden campaign said in a statement that the goal is to put together the most successful possible agenda for Democrats in 2020. Hey, that is a great idea. Biden added that he wants to ensure the U.S. doesn't just reset the clock back to a time before Donald Trump. We want to do something more. We want to move forward. The big name that we can drop in all of this, I guess, is one of the co-chairs of the Climate Change Task Force, which will be Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a prominent supporter of Sanders and a leader in the progressive movement, I think. We can all agree with that? I don't know. She will co-chair the panel alongside former Secretary of State John Kerry. So now, of course, there was this, you should be looking at it like, oh, well, what a great way of including her. And, but now I'm guessing that the Sanders said, well, she's going to co-chair with John Kerry of all people. She's going to be totally neutered and all this. It's pretty hard to totally neuter Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Quite honestly, she handles herself pretty well. I don't know if John Kerry would be up to the task, even if that was the task that he was being given in secret. So, I think this, whatever. I don't know whether anything really comes of it, but we'll throw it out there because there'll be some debate about whether or not it's been an effective thing, whether or not it's going to work, whether or not it's just a ploy to placate Sanders people. And, of course, to an extent it is, but, of course, to an extent it has to be, and it was expected to be, and that's the way elections work. But, a continuing theme on the show, so we should take note of it. Let's see. Anything updatable here on the Canada situation? Brian Monroe just letting us know from the other side. You guys stay on your side of the fence, and we will stay on ours. And giving me a little winky face emoji there, which I guess means that he intends to sneak across and steal our money and then sneak back, probably, and not allow us in, which isn't a bad policy. But okay, so no change there. No anonymous sources from the other side saying that they're going to do things differently. Okay, big topic of discussion online yesterday. We haven't mentioned it yet, and I don't think I'm really going to be giving it a great deal of time, but a lot of people, what are we going to say, flummoxed, perhaps, by the Time magazine piece running under the title, Jared Kushner admits there's risk in reopening the country too soon. No risk to him acknowledging that risk. But there it is. I think people were talking about it because apparently at some point, let's see, it's Tessa Berenson and Brian Bennett are the byline on the piece for Time. And I guess they interview him and they must have asked him at some point about whether or not it was possible that the coronavirus outbreak could delay the election if there were a second wave or we never finished the first wave and people were still getting sick and having to isolate at home into November, would we see the election delayed? And, well, really, here is where Jared should have said, I guess, something slightly different to what he did. He said, I don't know. I don't make that decision. What he should have said is, that's not even in my wheelhouse. I don't have anything to do with that. I'm an assistant to the president. That is way above my pay grade. But he'd never say such a thing anyway. That would have been smart. But it wasn't that far off, really, from what he did say. It's just he doesn't know how to be. He doesn't know how to approach anything with humility. And I guess he stepped into it a little further than he really had to. But ultimately, my view of what I saw distilled out of that interview about delaying the election was, he was saying, I don't know, that's not something I decide. What are you asking me for? But he did it in a way, because he can't cut himself out of the decision-making loop because he thinks he's acting president. So he never fully distanced himself from it. All right. So other than that, though, I mean, unless there was something else that you really thought among the listening audience really thought had to be highlighted from that piece, that's really all I have to say about it. I think people were overreacting to Kushner's response, and there are so many other things that we should be reacting much more strongly to about what he's been up to, that maybe we'll move on to some of those. Let's see. I do want to update things in the Flynn case if I could, but let me start with maybe we can start in on some of the other Kushner things. So many other things that he's involved in are so much worse, and we ought to be more concerned about what he's doing in those areas as opposed to him saying, I don't make the decision on whether or not the election is going to be delayed. There is a follow-up piece in the Washington Post by Isaac Stanley Becker. I don't know if he's the one who did the original piece on this. They mention this is a throwback. Yeah, he was involved in it. But this is a throwback piece and a follow-up. A contractor promised FEMA 10 million masks for $55 million, which was not a good deal. It did not deliver, and that was not hard to predict. But this is a follow-up on the story of, I'm pretty sure we read through this, right, of Panthera Worldwide LLC. This was the group like Virginia-based, but incorporated in Delaware, that came out of nowhere, that had another one of these places with no experience whatsoever in sourcing these kinds of materials, but who used to be in like security consulting, but then said, I have a connection, we'll get you some masks. Well, they didn't. A little-known Virginia-based defense company that was awarded a $55 million federal contract to provide 10 million N95 masks for the U.S. government's coronavirus response failed to deliver and had its contract canceled Tuesday, according to FEMA. Panthera Worldwide LLC, whose parent company filed for bankruptcy protection last year, had promised to deliver the much-needed personal protective equipment by May 1st, which is not even yesterday. It was even further back than yesterday, despite having no history of providing such materials to the government. The owners told the Washington Post last month, in the article I think that we read, that the company was aiming to deliver the materials 2 weeks early. Okay, on time. Okay, 2 weeks late. Okay, cancel my contract. That's how that one went. Instead, they sought a 10-day extension to May 11th and ultimately did not furnish the items. We are patriots and take pride in our products for the U.S. government. They don't have that product, though, especially during this real medical crisis, which is real. One of the company's executives, James V. Punelli, wrote in an email on April 15th. He also promised that the masks would be provided before May 1st, quote, for certain, in full, and with a very high-quality product. So much for that. You're a big liar. And I think, if I remember correctly, this was a company that were the two principals in this company, I think previously, in addition to being now defense contractors, were like, is this, or was that the Blue Flame guys? I can't remember who it was that turned out to be like, yeah, your previous business was supplying golf carts to Trump National in Virginia. But okay. we can get masks. No, they can't. Pinelli and his business partner Raymond C. Jones did not respond to requests for comment Tuesday on the contract's cancellation, though they had promised they were definitely, totally going to do it, and early at that. An attorney who has represented the men in bankruptcy proceedings, really, Mark Lindsay, also did not respond to a request for comment. They used to be bankrupt, but now they're billionaires. Lee Krager, a FEMA spokeswoman, said Tuesday the company had requested another 4-day extension to May 15th, but the agency denied the request. FEMA moved to cancel the contract Tuesday, a day after the deadline, their first extension. FEMA will continue to coordinate with our federal and state partners along with private vendors. They're going to try and get masks elsewhere is what they're saying. Big deal. Helpful comment. The unfulfilled contract leaves the U.S. government without an expected delivery of 10 million of the sought-after masks, which provide enhanced protection against the novel coronavirus. You know all about that. They filter stuff out. Thanks a lot. That's really helpful. This is really interesting, too. And this is just another one of those things. I guess this is where I really wonder about and what the numbers and whether they're following along with when Jared Kushner speaks, the things that he says that really do bother me, aside from the things that I think he's just flubbing, like yesterday's Time interview, is that he stands up there and says, we've made, record-making progress. We've broken all the procurement records. We're buying millions and millions of masks, millions of dollars worth of masks. And for instance, we just bought $55 million worth of N95 masks from a contractor who's guaranteeing not only their delivery, but 2 weeks early. So he gets up and gets to make that speech and get credit for buying 10 million masks at a terrible price, $55 million. And then it, in reality, it doesn't come through. And is there any follow-up? You can't waste Jared Kushner's valuable time asking him. Last week, you said you were bragging on how many millions of masks you bought. And as it turns out, none of them got delivered. So what do you have to say about that? And his answer is, now he'll go out and try and buy those 10 million. We need the 10 million masks. He'll try and buy them from someone else who may or may not have them. And if he was successful in concluding a contract, and the contract even works, then he'll say, well, I bought 20 million masks. I contracted for 20 million masks. He won't say I bought them. He'll weasel out. I contracted for 20 million masks for $110 million. The first one fell through. It's the same 10 million masks. I contracted for them twice. The $110 million I put into buying those masks only went out once as $55 million. But the point is, more contracts were signed. I'm the world leader in signing big-time contracts with nobody for nothing. How about that? So the unfulfilled contract leaves the U.S. government without this delivery. They got to look for it elsewhere. The point of contact listed for Panthera worldwide in a federal procurement database is Sepp Benedict, a retired Navy commander and intelligence officer. Included with his name is an address in Leesburg, Virginia, that is shared by the parent company. An online profile says Benedict lives in Switzerland and served until February as Director of Operations and Business Development for Panthera in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. It also includes a resume with the full name of C. Joseph Corwin Medard Benedict. I don't know what Sepp means, but I recognize it from, what was the guy's name? Sepp Blatter, the guy from FIFA. So now we can confuse FIFA and FEMA once again. Benedict did not respond to requests for comment. He's in Switzerland. He doesn't give a crap. Biographical. Now, if it was biological information, that'd be different. But biographical information associated with his name provided by the U.S. Navy indicates he enlisted as a student in 1983 and served for 3 years abroad in Japan and then Italy. I guess he gave them all coronavirus. With the Naval Security Group, which conducts intelligence operations. He transferred to the Navy Reserve when he returned to the United States, but he did additional stints in Europe in the early 2000s, rising to the rank of commander in 2004. He retired in 2008. Not the most distinguished career I've ever heard about. A spokesman for the Air Force, Michael Dickerson, said records indicate Benedict was employed as a civilian intelligence specialist from 1991 to 1995. with the 67th Intelligence Group in Los Angeles. The Defense Intelligence Agency declined to comment. In April, Punelli said Panthera Worldwide was a separate legal entity from the parent organization and was procuring the masks through the Department of Defense's contracting relationships the company has. He did not elaborate on the relationships, but we can elaborate on them. They don't have any goddamn masks, and they never will. But this sounds like some interesting detail. I'll comb through it during the break and see if there's more to be culled from it. Otherwise, we'll just attack Jared Kushner head on after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's continue. I'm curious because we spent so much time on Panthera last time around to follow up and see what other details we can discover from this. The parent corporation, Panthera Enterprises, declared bankruptcy last year, estimating in a filing that it could have as many as 99 creditors, got 99 creditors, and liabilities as high as $50 million. Punelli and Jones are being sued by a subcontractor leasing the company's primary asset, a 750-acre training facility in West Virginia. That's what they have going for them. Punelli, in an email last month, dismissed the lawsuit as frivolous. But, then again, so was their estimate that they'd be able to come up with 10 million and 95 masks. Business partners have accused Punelli and Jones of fraud in lawsuits filed in several states. Sound like great contractors for the government. In 2018, Punelli admitted to entering into a contract on behalf of an aerospace company that he had, quote, no authority to represent. What? According to his affidavit in a case brought against him and others in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of North Carolina. How do you live a life like this? The no-bid contract for N95 masks with the embattled company, that's kind, struck procurement experts as unusual. Even under emergency circumstances, federal agencies are required to determine that contractors are responsible and to find the price fair and reasonable, said Daniel Gordon, a former administrator for the federal procurement policy in the Obama administration. Arrest him. And former acting general counsel in the Government Accountability Office, someone who actually knows how these things work. Well, it's not uncommon for deliveries to be late or otherwise inadequate. It's extremely rare, he says, for contracts to be terminated for default. Such a move can block the company from receiving any future federal contracts, he said. I bet this one won't. Krager, the FEMA spokeswoman, said a contracting officer had performed a responsibility determination for Panthera, and she said the company would not be barred from future contracts and would not face a penalty fee, though she declined to elaborate on those decisions because they would be baseless. Let's see. Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, said the failed contract was yet another example of a systemic problem affecting contracting at FEMA. He warned that such unfulfilled contracts place the health and safety of our first responders at risk. And they do. And that probably would ordinarily, if we had unlimited time, lead us to note that we should be talking about another item in the news. As predicted, what's showing up all over the place, counterfeit and fake test kits and N95 masks and everything else that is necessary to combat the virus. It was as predictable as anything that scam artists, mobsters, and Chinese counterfeiters and Russian mobsters and everybody in between would start delivering this stuff, and maybe even fulfilling some of these official contracts with that stuff. So they are discovering that those things are happening, and think about the danger of that masks are showing up at hospitals that purport to be N95 masks, and people are placing their lives in the hands of these contractors, and these are unscrupulous people, or sometimes, I guess, subcontractors who might have just been fooled into moving the stuff. If you have no experience, for instance, in sourcing N95 masks, and a factory in China hands you things that say, yeah, these are N95 masks, and you don't know what you're doing, you'll pass them on. People will put them on, although presumably you would think that the healthcare professionals would recognize immediately. Some of these counterfeits are really, really bad. Essentially, the story, long story short on the counterfeiting, if you are handed a mask and told that this is an N95 mask, and it attaches, it fastens to your face with ear loops rather than around the back of the head fasteners, you don't have a real N95 mask. They don't work without a tight seal on the face. You can't get that with the ear loops. That's what was happening here. Why healthcare professionals didn't recognize this at the outset? Maybe they're not used to dealing with N95s all the time and just don't know, or they're just taking what they can get. But at any rate, one of the problems with contracting for N95 masks with people whose real job is renting golf carts or renting out a training facility to somebody else to do the defense contractor training that they claim they do. Yeah, you're going to get fooled a lot, and that's only if they weren't looking to get fooled in order to make a profit. Anyway, the deal with Panthera reflects the mad dash by the Trump administration to secure critically needed personal protective equipment, or PPE. As part of the scramble, federal agencies have awarded bulk contracts to third-party vendors for supplies at prices nearly 8 times what they would have spent earlier in the year when U.S. agencies warned of a pandemic. In January, the government turned down an offer. We never did get to this story. In January, they turned down an offer for a domestic manufacturer, like a real place that's regulated and everything, to produce millions of N95 masks. It's linked in this story. Oops, I should open up a new window for that one, a new tab for that one. That definitely deserves discussion, and it's been sitting in pocket for days under other various emergencies like how to cook chicken. But yes, very true. January, government turned down offer from domestic manufacturer to produce millions of N95 masks. Whoops, that looks bad, right? The price that FEMA agreed to pay Panthera per mask, about $5.50, is significantly higher than what the government pays companies such as 3M, which charges as little as 63 cents per N95 mask, according to Company Price Index. FEMA is not alone among the federal agencies in agreeing to pay steep prices for the masks, which are in use in hospitals, clinics, police departments, and fire and rescue stations from coast to coast. The Department of Health and Human Services last month finalized a $100 million contract for 10 million N95 respirators, meaning each mask would cost $10. An HHS spokesperson said the order was pending an emergency use authorization from the Food and Drug Administration, as well as other applicable certifications. So every agency getting fooled on that one. Might as well jump over to that outrageous story from earlier, just referenced a minute ago. In the early days of the pandemic, the U.S. government turned down an offer to manufacture millions of N95 masks in America. Because why would Donald Trump want that done, right? Aaron Davis wrote this up for the Washington Post back on May 9th. The story begins back on January 22nd, one day after the first case of COVID-19 was detected in the United States. So like a real manufacturer who actually kept an eye on his business and the conditions that would affect it. Apparently a guy by the name of Mike Bowen, vice president of Prestige Ameritech, who's photographed in the illustrative piece here. So, January 21st, the day after the first COVID-19 case detected in the United States, orders were pouring into Michael Bowen's company outside of Fort Worth. By God, that's Texas, and everyone loves giving money to Texas. some orders from as far away as Hong Kong when they realized, gosh, we need this stuff. And of course, he realized, so do we. Bowen's medical supply company, Prestige Ameritech, could ramp up production to make an additional 1.7 million N95 masks a week. He viewed the shrinking domestic production of medical masks as a national security issue, though, and he wanted to give the federal government first dibs. That's actually like smart, patriotic, even economically foresighted. I mean, I'm sure as a matter of business for him, he wanted very badly to convince the United States federal government that it was a national security risk for them not to be buying millions of masks all the time from his company, except he was actually right. We still have 4 like-new N95 manufacturing lines, Bowen wrote that day in an email to top administrators at HHS. Reactivating these machines would be very difficult and very expensive, but could be achieved in a dire situation. But communications over several days with senior agency officials, including Robert Kadlec, remember him? The Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Emergency Response, who came out very badly in one of the more recent investigations. Well, those communications left Bowen with the clear impression that there was little immediate interest in his offer. I don't believe we as a government are anywhere near answering those questions for you yet, Laura Wolf, director of the agency's Division of Critical Infrastructure Protection, responded that same day. Bowen persisted. He was a persistent guy, like as Elizabeth Warren, who's not a guy, but is persistent. We are the last major domestic mask company, he wrote on January 23rd. My phones are ringing now, so I don't need government business. I'm just letting you know that I can help you preserve our infrastructure if things ever get really bad. I'm a patriot first, businessman second. And that's the problem. We need to have a businessman in the White House and an American second, or a patriot second, or whatever it is. Okay, we got it wrong. In the end, the government did not take Bowen up on his offer. Even today, production lines that could be making more than 7 million masks a month sit dormant. Meanwhile, by the way, idiots are protesting outside of their state capital saying, oh, we want to work. We demand the right to work. There's a mask production facility in Fort Worth, Texas that could be working right now. I don't see you making any moves toward the place, and you have no interest in it because you never really were interested in working. You wanted other people to work, to cut your hair and file your nails for you, and or you were being paid to stand around saying, I want to work, when you really don't. In the end, the government does nothing. Bowen's overture was described briefly in an 89-page whistleblower complaint filed last week, I guess, by Rick Bright, we all remember him, former director of the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA. Bright alleges he was retaliated against by Kadlec and other officials, including being reassigned to a lesser post because he tried to prioritize science and safety over political expediency. HHS has disputed his allegations. Emails show Bright pressed Kadlec and other agency leaders on the issue of mask shortages and Bowen's proposal specifically, to no avail. January 26th, Bright wrote to a deputy that Bowen's warnings seemed to be falling on deaf ears. That day, Bowen sent Bright a more direct warning. U.S. mask supply is at imminent risk, he wrote. Rick, I think we're in deep S, which is then dashed out. I don't know whether he wrote the dashes or not, but you know what he meant. He wrote a day later, and we are, and now we have a pandemic, and we have 1 million more cases than anybody else in the whole world, and we still have millions more to discover because of this. I mean, in hindsight, yeah, you know, it being 2020 and everything, but I mean, could there be a clearer case? Did you know that there was, I mean, I guess you did because this article is a week old, but that there's capacity to produce, what did they say, 7 million masks a week sitting dormant in Texas. Why? Why? Where's President Great Deals? How is that not running? The story of Bowen's offer illustrates a missed opportunity in the early days of the pandemic, and a missed opportunity in the late days of the pandemic, I would add. Let's see. There's one, of course, laid out in Bright's whistleblower complaint, interviews with Bowen, and emails provided by both men. Within weeks, a shortage of masks was endangering healthcare workers in hard-hit areas across the country, and the Trump administration was scrambling to buy more masks. sometimes placing bulk orders with third-party distributors for many times the standard price, which we just read about. President Trump came under pressure to use extraordinary government powers to force the private industry to ramp up production. And still, they're not working. In a statement, White House economic advisor and coronavirus task force member Peter Navarro said the company was just extremely difficult to work with and communicate with. I mean, they contacted you and said, I can make millions of masks. Do you want them? How difficult is that? This was in sharp contrast to groups like the National Council of Textile Organizations and companies like Honeywell and Parkdale Mills, which have helped America very rapidly build up cost-effective domestic mask capacity measuring in the hundreds of millions. Carol Danko, an HHS spokeswoman, declined to comment on the offer by Bowen and other allegations raised in the whistleblower complaint. Wolf also declined to comment on the whistleblower complaint. A senior U.S. government official with knowledge of the offer said Bowen, 62, has a, quote, legitimate beef. Now, I guess one part of the story not being told. I would love to know from the government whether there's a legitimate, story from their point of view. Well, did he make it difficult? Was he not just saying, I'll make these things, but was he saying thus and such a thing had to happen first, or he wanted to be invited to the White House for a photo op or anything weird like that? I'd love to know, but they could spill those beans. The president certainly should. I guess you have to make him feel under more pressure before he starts digging up the dirt and the complaints about Bowen, or making them up in order to see those aired. Anyway, somebody says that Bowen had a legitimate beef. He was prescient, really, the official said. Speaking on condition of anonymity, of course, because he'll get fired if that's true. But the reality is HHS didn't have the money to do it at that time. Now, that's something different, money. But, they had the money to pay 5-8 times the normal price to people who couldn't get anything. And they still won't stop contracting with those guys. Another HHS official, also speaking on condition of anonymity, said there's a process for putting out contracts. It wasn't as fast as anyone wanted it to be. 2 decades ago, the low-slung factory in Texas was part of a supply conglomerate that produced almost 9 in 10 medical and surgical masks used in the United States. Bowen was a new product specialist at the plant back then, and he watched as industry consolidations and outsourcing shifted control of the plant from Technol Medical Products to Kimberly-Clark, and then shuttered it altogether. In less than a decade, almost 90% of all U.S. mask production had moved out of the country, according to government reports at the time, which is interesting, and at one point was a legitimate beef of Donald Trump and some of his supporters, that we were moving critical manufacturing infrastructure too quickly and too thoroughly overseas, and in particular over to China, and that a international crisis of some kind, whether a pandemic or trouble with China, could really endanger us here in the United States. But I guess he only wanted that to be able to shout at rallies and not to actually do anything about it. President Great Deals couldn't make anything happen with respect to that particular problem. Bowen and Dan Reese, a former executive at Technol, which used to own the plant, went into business together in 2005 and eventually bought the plant, believing a market remained for a dedicated domestic manufacturer of protective gear. In the wake of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, Congress appropriated $6 billion to buy antidotes to bioweapons and the medical supplies the country would need in public health disasters. An obscure new government organization called the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, which is, I guess, patterned after like DARPA, right, was among the agencies purchasing material for what would become the Strategic National Stockpile, which would become Jared Kushner's personal plaything later on. Bowen began studying BARDA, attending its industry conferences and searching for a way to press his case. Very smart, very forward-thinking. Good business, even if you don't want to credit him for strategic thinking necessarily. In the parlance of BARDA, Bowen was seeking a warm base contract. Don't know what that means. Let's see. The government would pay a premium to have masks manufactured domestically, but his company would keep its extra factory lines in working order, meaning production could be ramped up in an emergency. Bowen said he soon concluded that BARDA's focus was trained elsewhere, on billion-dollar deals to induce manufacturing of vaccines for the most exotic disasters, such as weaponized attacks with anthrax or smallpox. Those are things to worry about, that's true. But of course, either one of them would probably have required PPE for hospital personnel. Still, as Bowen moved down the supply chain, appealing directly to hospitals to buy his domestic-made masks, his sales pitch often ended with a plea to call BARDA. Bowen often carried PowerPoint slides from a 2007 presentation by BARDA and its parent division at HHS, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. One had a table showing that in the event of a pandemic, the country would need 5.3 billion N95 respirator masks, 50 times more than the number in the stockpile. The presentation concluded, industrial surge capacity of respiratory protection devices will not be able to meet need, and supplies will be short during a pandemic. Wow, that turned out to be true. Bowen said he felt like a voice in the wilderness. The world just looked at me as a mask salesman who was trying to say the sky was falling. And they would say, your competitors aren't saying that in China. After Trump's election, Bowen hoped the new president's America First mentality might trickle down to operations like his. I bet he voted for him. He wrote a letter to Trump and addressed it to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's where the president allegedly is staying. 90% of the United States protective mask supply is currently foreign-made, in capitals, it says. It began. You'd think that would, capture his attention. But he failed to say, and you're orange and gorgeous. I didn't think Trump would read it, but I thought someone would and take note, Bowen said. He also called Bright, who had been appointed to lead BARDA just before Trump took office. In 14 years of doing this, there have been maybe 4 people in government who I felt like really understood this issue, Bowen said, and Rick was one of them. In Trump's first year, however, Bowen grew newly disillusioned. During a week when the White House touted its Buy American, Hire American initiative, Bowen lost a military contract worth up to $1 million to a supplier that would make many of the masks in Mexico. He said just exactly what everybody thought Trump was going to do, right? Oh, the opposite? Shame on the Department of Defense. One of these days, the U.S. military will need America's manufacturers to help win another war or fight another pandemic, and they will not exist, Bowen wrote on August 17, 2017, to Major General Jeffrey Clark, a senior official with the Pentagon's Defense Health Agency. Clark, who retired last year and wasn't around to see the fruit of his screwing up, did not respond to a message-seeking comment. For Bowen, the first signs of trouble came in mid-January. Online orders through his company's website, typically totaling maybe $2,000 a year and accounting for only a fraction of his business, suddenly skyrocketed to almost $700,000 in a few days. On January 20th, Bowen also fielded a call from the Department of Homeland Security, urgently seeking masks for airport screeners. Bowen said he did not have masks in stock to fill the order, but the call led him to contact Bright to tell him about the surge in demand for masks. Is this virus going to be problematic? Bowen wrote. Inside HHS, Bright quickly passed Bowen's on-the-ground observations to a group that included Wolf, the director of the agency's Division of Critical Infrastructure Protection. Can you please reach out to Mike Bowen below? He's a great partner and a really good source for helpful information, Bright wrote on January 21st. Oh, by the way, could you also, in the meantime, could you also contact Jared Kushner's friend, the Silicon Valley engineer who has no experience in any of this stuff, and he'll get some ventilators built. That guy got a call on a contract and money. Thanks, Rick, she replied. We are tracking and have begun to coordinate with FDA, NIOSH, N-I-O-S-H. I'm not even certain whether we've identified them before, and manufacturers today. More to follow tomorrow. Thinking about masks, gowns, including those in shortage, gloves, and eye protection. Within a day, Bowen sent an email to Wolf laying out what Prestige could do. The company's 4 mothballed manufacturing lines could be restarted with large non-cancelable orders, he wrote. This is not something we would ever wish to do and have no plans to do it on our own, he wrote. I'm simply letting you know that in a dire situation it could be done. I guess because they didn't volunteer to swallow the costs for it, no one called them back. Over the next 3 days, Bowen kept HHS officials informed as orders for 1 million masks came in from intermediaries for buyers in China and Hong Kong. On January 26th, he sent the email warning that the U.S. mask supply was at imminent risk. Bright forwarded it that day to Kadlik and others, urging action. We have been watching and receiving warnings on this for over a week, he wrote. Isn't that interesting? We've been watching and receiving warnings. What's been happening with all the warnings we've been receiving? Nothing. No matter what kind of warnings they are. The next day, Bright wrote to his deputy asking him to explore whether BARDA could divert money earmarked for vaccines and other biodefense measures to instead buy masks. From his end, Bowen said his proposal seemed to be going nowhere. No one at HHS ever did get back to me in a substantive way, Bowen said. The senior U.S. official said Bowen's idea was considered, but funding could not easily be obtained without diverting it from other projects. They diverted defense money into a wall, but they couldn't divert BARDA money into buying masks, even though that's what they're supposed to be doing. Bowen started talking to reporters about the mask shortage in general terms. He was soon invited to appear on former Trump advisor Stephen Bannon's podcast, War Room Pandemic. So he even made it to there and still didn't get his deal done. On February 12th's podcast, the two commiserated over the beleaguered state of U.S. manufacturing. What I've been saying since 2007 is, guys, I'm warning you, here's what's going to happen. Let's prepare, Bowen said on the program, because if you call me after it starts, I can't help everybody. Bowen said Bannon put him in touch with Navarro, the White House economic advisor. Navarro was quick to see the problem, Bowen said. After talking with Navarro, Bowen wrote to Bright that he should soon expect a call from the White House. I'm pretty sure that my mask supply message will be heard by President Trump this week, Bowen wrote. Trump insider reading yesterday's Wired.com article, "The ball is screaming toward your court." I don't even know what that's supposed to mean, but okay. According to Bright's complaint, he soon began attending White House meetings and helping Navarro write memos describing the supply of masks as a top issue. Emails and memos attached to the complaint show Bright reporting back to Kadlik and others about his work with Navarro. None of it turned the tide for Bowen. Nearly a month after his emailed offer, Bowen received his first formal communication about possibly helping to bolster the U.S. supply. The 5-page form letter from the FDA, one Bowen said he suspected was sent to many manufacturers, asked how his company could help with what was by then a national emergency response to the shortage of protective gear. On February 16th, he responded, firing off a terse email to FDA and HHS officials. He directed the agencies to a U.S. government website listing approved foreign manufacturers of medical masks. There you'll find a long list of approved Chinese respirator companies, he wrote. Please send your long list of questions to them. In other words, Bowen was the first one to say, why don't you go ask China? I guess what's emerging from all this, despite how prescient he is and how much I wish we had listened, there is still this ironic undercurrent. This is clearly, I think, and he's downplaying it in this interview, I guess, that resulted in this article, but we're clearly talking about a Trump supporter who supported Trump because he thought it would be good for his business, and then Trump screwed him over and it wasn't good for his business. And even when he gets connected with Steve Bannon and Navarro and everybody begins to see the light, and still he couldn't make the deal, couldn't close the deal. President Great Deals couldn't close the deal either. And I guess in a way, except for the fact that it's cost us all so much and has exacerbated the problems and led to so many people dying, including so many heroic healthcare workers who should never have had to deal with it on a level where they were dying. They died too. But underlying all of this, essentially, we get a MAGA supporter who thought he was going to be able to cash in and then couldn't put it together. And then when it wasn't coming together, communicated. Now I'm beginning to see what some of these people are talking about when they say he was difficult to deal with, right? He gets a letter from the FDA saying, can you help? And rather than answering yes, and here, and we're going to start doing it, his answer was he wanted to know, I've been telling you people since forever, why weren't you listening to me? And while he might get people now through this article to acknowledge, yes, you were prescient, you were right, he didn't actually get to manufacture any of the masks that would have helped fix this thing. He was more interested in being vindicated and proven right, which kind of reminds me of the guy he probably voted for in the first place. And then he comes and says, why don't you go ask China? Well, no wonder if people thought he was difficult to deal with. Well, anyway, in March, Bowen submitted a bid to supply masks to FEMA, which by then had taken over the purchasing. The government soon spent over $600 million on contracts involving masks. Lots of other big companies were awarded contracts for over $170 million of protective gear. And then we find out there's mention of the Panthera thing. They got their $5.50 a piece and couldn't come up with any masks. What an effective campaign by Bowen, eh?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, that ended up going in a different direction than I thought, but very interesting, and I'm glad we got to explore it. There's much more to be explored. Justice Putnam is up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and he's got his own raft of stories, some of which are way off of the beaten path, and you need to tune in and find out what he's got in store for you next.